Okay, what we're going to speak today is the beginning of the true Malchut Bet David. Good morning, Harold. The true beginning of Malchut Bet David. Now, in order to understand this properly, we have to learn two Sforim at the same time, two books at the same time. The first one is Shmuel, and the second one is Divrei Hayomim. Now, and the whole time we'll be jumping from Shmuel to Divrei Hayomim. So let's start off. Okay, let's start off by reading the Pesukim which we're going to speak about today. The Navi says the following. This is in Shmuel Bet. Now I've tried to make it every two lines so people won't get lost in it. Shmuel Bet Perek Hey Pesukim Aleph to Hey. Vayavo kol shiftei Yisrael el David Chevrona. All the tribes of Israel come to David who's in Hebron. Vayomru, and they said Leimor the following: Hinenu atzmecha ub'sarcha anachnu. We're part of your flesh and blood. Gam etzmol, also yesterday, Gam Shilshom, and a few days before, Biyot Shaul Melech Aleinu, when Shaul was a king, Atayita Motzi Mavi et Yisrael, used to be the one who brought everything to Shaul from Klal Yisrael. Vayomer Hashem lecha, and God said to you, Atatiret Ami Yisrael, you're going to be the one who's going to be the shepherd of Am Yisrael. Vatatiel lenagid al Yisrael. This is what the Shvatim say. The next stage is Vayavo kol ziknei Yisrael el HaMelech Hebron. Then come the Zkenim. Vayichot lahem Melech HaMelech David Brit b'Hebron lifnei Hashem. Vayimshechu et David lemelech al Yisrael. So therefore we have two stages. The first one is the Shvatim, the tribes, and the next one is Zkenim. And then there's a summary. Shmuel, it's written in Sefer Shmuel. Ben Shloshim Shana David b'Molcho. He was 30 years old. B'Molcho Arba'im Shana Melech. He was 40 years a king. B'Hebron Malach al Yehuda Sheva Shanim b'Shisha Chodoshim. In Hebron he reigned 7 years and 6 months. Yerushalayim Malach 33 Shana al Kol Yisrael v'Yud. Right, that's what's written in Sefer Shmuel. Now, Devarim Aleph Perek Yud Aleph, Divrei Hayomim Aleph Perek Yud Aleph. Here is also a similar story. Vayikavtzu Kol Yisrael el David Chevrona. They gathered together. Hinenu atzmecha ub'sarcha anachnu. Gam tmol gal shilshom. Gam biyot Shaul melech ata motzi ba'am mivit Yisrael. Vayomer Hashem Elokecha lecha. Ata tiret am Yisrael v'ata tiret nagid al ami. You're going to be the prince. Vayavo kol ziknei Yisrael melech Hebrona. Vayichot lahem David brit b'Hebron lifnei Hashem. Vayimshechehu et David lemelech al Yisrael. Kidvar Hashem beyad Shmuel. Now, what we're going to speak about now is the following. Take note of the differences between Shmuel and Divrei Hayomim. Shmuel, it's written Vayavo kol shiftei Yisrael. Divrei Hayomim, it's written Vayikavtzu. But what's quite amazing is the last statement in line number 24. Vayimshecheu et David lemelech al Yisrael. Kidvar Hashem beyad Shmuel. Now, this concept of Kidvar Hashem beyad Shmuel. Now, the first lines of the Malbim are the following. Ezra. That means the one who writes Divrei Hayomim is Ezra HaSofer. Okay? Now, what we're going to discuss now is the following. We're going to discuss the differences before we get into the actual essence of the story here. And says the following. The Malbim points out a very interesting thing. Vayikavtzu. Ezra dileg. Ezra jumps over, and I've also jumped over this, but the chapters before, from the death of Shmuel Perek, if you look at it in line number 6, Perek Hey, we've jumped over Perek Gimel Dalet, because there in Perek Gimel and Dalet we speak about how the house of Shaul, the children of Shaul, especially Avner, they try to carry on the dynasty of David, of Shaul. And since they want to carry on the dynasty of Shaul, David HaMelech has a bit of a problem. So therefore, but what's written in Divrei Hayomim is the following in line number 26 or 27. Ezra jumps over the whole story, Kol Sipur HaMaaseh Mehamlachat Ishboshet, from the time when they tried to create Ishboshet is the king, V'shemalach David botam shanim al Yehuda bilvado, and in that period, David HaMelech was only king over Shaul, over Yehuda. Why? Because the whole essence of the story of Divrei Hayomim, or the narrative, the true terminology is the narrative of Divrei Hayomim, is ba rak lahagdil ma'alat David, in order to uplift David HaMelech's greatness. The ikar sipuro min hamlucha hakolelet she'az nitkaima divrei Shmuel. The essence of Divrei Hayomim is to show us how the prophecy of Shmuel took place. That is the essence of Divrei Hayomim. Ezra wants to create for the Jewish people who come back from Eretz Yisrael, that remember who is the true king. We're talking about Shivat Sion, the period where Am Yisrael come back to Eretz Yisrael and Shei Knesset Gdolah. The essence of this period is to create the importance that the true king will always be the children of David HaMelech, his dynasty. And that's what Ezra tries to do in Divrei Hayomim. Uma shekatav vayikbetzu kol Yisrael shetchila ba'u Yisrael ba'atzmam ukmo shesiper b'siman Yud-Bet v'achrei ze ba'u askenim shehem haSanhedrin she'amalchut amlachat HaMelech tzarich al pi ziknei ha'ida, all that we're going to speak about later on. And the Radak also in line number 36 points out the same thing. ובדברי היומim אומר, וימשכו את דוד למלך על ישראל, בדבר השם ביד שמואל, לפי שלא היה נתקיים דבר שמואל עד היום הזה. The prophecy of Shmuel did not actually come into the existence until this day. Why? כי שמואל משכו למלך על כל ישראל, כמו שהיה שאול מלך על כל ישראל. So when in actual fact did the prophecy of Shmuel actually take place? Once all of Israel came to accept David as king. Now, that's the importance of Divrei Hayomim. Okay, the importance of Divrei Hayomim is not the act of the coronation of David, but that the prophecy of Shmuel actually takes place. That is the essence of Divrei Hayomim. And that's what Ezra Sofer wants to tell us. This, the coronation of David HaMelech, is not because the people wanted it. It's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu anointed him as king. So if it would have just relied on the will of the people, therefore, where do we know it's Semach David Abdecha Merat Atzmiach? Where do we know that? Ezra has to imbue in the Jewish people the essence that this was the will of God. Now, just to finish off before, if anybody's got any questions, there's a fascinating statement of one of the great Gdolim in the period of the Vilna Gaon. His name, or is known by the Shagas Aryeh. Perhaps some of you have heard of him. The Shagas Aryeh was a Reb Aryeh Leib HaKohen. He was one of the greatest Rabbonim in the period of the Vilna Gaon. He wrote a book called the Shagas Aryeh, and that's why he's known. He's also written a book called the Turei Aven, and he wrote a book on Masechet Yomah and Ta'anit and Makot, which is called the Gvurot Ari. And in the Gvurot Ari, in Daf Nun Daled, comes along the Gvurot Ari and says the following: Yesh lomar de'ezra he'etik divrei hayomim mikama sfarim shematza. What does that mean? This means to say, and here we have to digress a few minutes. This means to say, everybody, that Ezra Sofer had different manuscripts of what happened during the period of Beit Rishon. He has different manuscripts. He has different narratives. He has the narrative of the book of Shmuel. He has another narrative. He has other books. And in Divrei Hayomim, he actually, and since the problems are there's certain contradictions within Divrei Hayomim, and from Divrei Hayomim to other books, the Gvurot Ari says the library of Ezra Sofer was very big. And Ezra Sofer has to decide what books are going to be put in the Tanakh and what books are going to be left out, what I'm going to put in the Torah, in the Sifrei Nevi'im and Ksubim, and how I'm going to write it. This is the Chidush of the Gvurot Ari. And therefore, there is, and this is the most important thing, there is a certain purpose, a narrative which Ezra wants to create. A narrative which is not necessarily mentioned, not in Shmuel and not in Melachim. And we will see that when we learn the stories of the building of the Beis HaMikdash, or how David HaMelech wants to build the Beis HaMikdash, we will see different narratives there. Because of the purpose, the Megama, the object, the purpose of the writing of Sefer Divrei Hayomim. Now, this Chidush of the Gvurot Ari became a foundation of one of the biggest Chidushim, which the famous Reb Mordechai Breuer developed. Reb Mordechai Breuer, the famous one who taught Tanakh in the Gush in Har Etzion for many, many years, he based a lot of his theories on how to explain Torah based on this idea which the Gvurot Ari wrote in one of the first booklets which Har Etzion, Yeshivat Har Etzion brought out in the Michlala, which was called Megadim Bet. He wrote a fascinating article called the Torat HaTu'udot of the Shagas Aryeh, of the Gvurot Ari, which means to say the conceptual idea of different manuscripts which the Gvurot Ari builds on Divrei Hayomim, and from there, Reb Mordechai Breuer Zecher Tzadik Livrocha builds a whole system of how to understand Torah, how to understand, what's it called? Nevi'im Ksuvim. But this Chidush of the Gvurot Ari, we see it specifically here. What do we see here? We see here how Sefer Shmuel jumps over, and this is the most important thing, jumps over this story of, or the statement which is written in line number 24, Kidvar Hashem biyad Shmuel. This statement is not written in line number 13. Take note, in line number 13 it's written, Vayimshechu et David lemelech al Yisrael. The same thing in line number 24, Vayimshecheu et David lemelech al Yisrael. And then the narrative of the narrator, who adds on, Kidvar Hashem biyad Shmuel. If we were just to read the story in Shmuel, we will understand that Am Yisrael wanted to accept David as Melech. Ezra adds on this new purpose. It's not the people of Israel who wanted David. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu anoints David, and henceforth we say twice in the Shemona Esrei, V'chisei David avdecha me'eretz hatzmiach, V'chisei David me'eretz hatzmiach, and then again it's Tzemach David avdecha me'eretz hatzmiach. That is, now we'll begin. If anybody's got any hearot on that, please, because that's going to be one of the biggest subjects which we're going to speak about, how to look at Divrei Hayomim and what's it called, and Shmuel. Please, if anybody's got any questions, we're going to, please ask now. Or can I carry on? Right, let's carry on then. Now, going to now speak about line number 10. Line number 10 is, Vayomer Hashem lecha, ata tireh et ami Yisrael. You're going to be the shepherd. The same thing is written, line number 21, in, what's it called? There it's written, Vayomer Hashem lecha. Hashem says to you. Now, what's very interesting is the following. It's a Rashi in Sefer Divrei Hayomim. Now, Rashi on Divrei Hayomim is not really Rashi. It's not Rashi. It's somebody else who we don't know who it was. We're not sure who it is, but it's somebody who writes a perush on Divrei Hayomim, and the Chidah, one of the greatest bibliographers in Jewish history, writes in line number 45, Rashi, Piresh Atznach, Perush Divrei Hayomim, line number 45, Einenu Mirashi. Divrei Hayomim is not on Rashi, not written by Rashi. How do we know? Here's the best example. Because here in Divrei Hayomim, Rashi brings a very interesting statement, which is not found in Rashi on Shmuel, even though it's mentioned the first time. What does he say? Why does he use Ata tireh et ami? Because David HaMelech says, Al zeh, since David HaMelech felt he was the shepherd, Al zeh amar David, Hashem ro'i lo echsar. God is my shepherd, I shall not be missing anything. Says the Midrash or Rashi on Divrei Hayomim, line number 48, Ata omer li, you are saying to me, Ata tireh ma ani yachol lirot, you're going to be the shepherd. David HaMelech is going to be the shepherd of Am Yisrael. Says David, Ein hadavar talui bi. It's not dependent on me. Ela el Hashem. Hashem ro'i lo echsar, v'gam inni lo echsar lachem. Since God is my shepherd, you can ask me to look after Am Yisrael as a flock. Let's go back to the pasuk. Vayomer, line number 10. Vayomer Hashem lecha. God said to you, Ata tireh et ami. You will be the shepherd. What does David HaMelech say? David HaMelech says the other way of looking at it. You want me to be the shepherd, but who's the real shepherd? The real shepherd is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem ro'i lo echsar. It's a play on the word Ata tireh Hashem ro'i. And that is what Rashi, or the Mefaresh, the commentator on Sefer Divrei Hayomim, says. Now, let's go to the next stage. Let's go back to what happens here. Vayavo kol shiftei Yisrael, line number 6, and then Vayavo kol ziknei ha'ida. Here we have to learn a Rambam. Say Perush HaMishnayot on Masechet Kitut. Says the Rambam, Umalche bet David mutar lemoshcham b'shemen hamishcha. The kings of David, they were allowed to anoint with the shemen hamishcha. V'yesh, and he carries on the following. That v'hu shekasher nimshach David abashalom b'shemen hamishcha. With a minute David HaMelech was anointed, he became king. and also his children, his descendants, even though they weren't anointed. Where do you know that you don't need to anoint the king, the son of a king? Because the pasuk says, it comes to teach us, line number 57, there is a problem. Now, what are the conditions of how a king becomes a king? Number one, the Rambam says, there are 6 options how somebody can become a king. There was an agreement by all of Am Yisrael on one of the descendants of David HaMelech. Number one, or Shalchu Arov Acharav, the majority of Am Yisrael go afterwards. Either there's an agreement of everyone, or there's a majority, or Sheminu Sanhedrin, Sanhedrin anointing, or Navi, or a prophet, or Kohen Gadol, or Shehuskam Malchut Le'echad Mehem. Harei ze nimshach b'shemen hamishcha. Right. Now, that means there's 6 ways of somebody who's been accepting as a king. One is everybody agrees. The second one, majority. The third one, Sanhedrin. 4th, prophet, and Gadol. Let's go back to our sentences. Let's look. So, line number 7. Vayavo kol shiftei Yisrael. Everyone agrees with it. Kol shiftei Yisrael. Next one is kol ziknei Yisrael. Sanhedrin. In Shmuel, in Divrei Yomim, what's written? Novi says that. Dvar Hashem b'yad Shmuel. Here we have nearly every situation where everyone accepts David as a king. Therefore, what happens first? And now let's go through the way it worked out. This is written, the famous explanation of the Al-Shich. The Al-Shich says the following, and here it's a fascinating insight how to look at the Tanakh. It says the following, Vayavosh kol shiftei Yisrael. Hinei amru, they said, Atzmecha ub'sarcha anachnu. Halo, kumo zar nechashev. He was considered an outsider by all Am Yisrael. Shaul managed to create an environment whereby the whole of the Jewish people, including Shevet Binyamin, besides Shevet Yehuda, didn't want to have anything to do with David. So how can they now come and say, you're part of our flesh and blood? V'gam amru, gam etmol, al ezo zman, what are they speaking about? V'od omro, v'yavo kol ziknei Yisrael HaMelech. What do we need the Zakenim for if all the Shvatim? Says the Al-Shich, Ach Yomar, B'sum Lev, Shelo Amru Atzmeinu Ubsareinu Ata. You are our flesh and blood. Ela Atzmecha Ubsarcha Anachnu. We are your flesh and blood. Not that you are our flesh and blood, but we are your flesh and blood. והוא, כי הנה על אחד משלושה דברים ימענו לקבל אלתיהם את הבא למלוך עליהם. There are 3 reasons why somebody would not accept somebody as king. או מצד שאינו כדאי, that is not worthy of it, או מצד העם, or the people, שאינם ליבם עמו, their heart is not with him, ובלתי נאותים, או שרואים הוראה שאין חפצו יתברך בו, or they see something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want, כי אם בזולתו, they want something else. ועל כן, על שלושתם אמרו, על אחד, on the first one, עצמך ובשרך אנחנו, we are part of you, כלומר, אנחנו, בגוף ובנפש נחשבים כאילו אנו גופך. We're all in one. We are part of you. We, Am Yisrael, are now part of you. Shehu atzmcha ub'sarcha. Nimtza, it is found. Ki ata nefesh shelanu. You are our soul. Kilcha imruchacha gviatcha. Ki kol echut yitron shleimutcha aleinu. Ki yitron hanefesh alaguf. Fascinating insight. Not that you are part of us. No, we are part of you. They did what they call a sibuv, a turnaround of 180 degrees. If before you were not part of us, because you were from the tribe of Yehudah and we were Shaul, after all this period, they say, we are part of you. They've come to realize that all what Am Yisrael wants, or what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, is found in David HaMelech. You are the one who pumps the blood of spirituality into our bodies. I'll say that phrase again. You are the one who pumps the spiritual energy into our bodies. They've come to realize that David HaMelech is the true pump. Or as the Rambam puts it, the Melech is the Lev Ha'am. He's the heart of the people. He is the one who pumps spirituality, Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, everything. And that's what they say to him. Atzmacha ub'sarcha anachnu. We are inside you. You are the one who gives us our energy. Next statement, line number 80. V'gam ki hinei ta'ana shniya gam ken yesh, u'mitzad ha'am. Ki etmol gam shilshom b'yot Shaul melech aleinu, ata yitza motziu mevi v'yeot lecha. That means even when Shaul was living, there were times in Shaul's life where you were the one who was so connected to us. Nachon, Shaul was in total depression and he was fighting. But deep down we know that you considered Shaul the Mashiach Hashem. Ve'im mitzad hashlishi me'achefetz ha'elokit barach la'at. Ki hinei amru vayomer Hashem lecha. אתה תראה את עמי ישראל ואתה תהיה נגיד ישראל. ויהיה עניין כפל לשון ומילות שונות. There are two expressions here. One is be the shepherd and the one is the prince. And that is the objective of, what's it called? Of being a king. What does he say? And this is very, very beautiful. He says the following in line 986. וזה יאמר יאמר השם לך, אתה תראה את עמי ישראל. כלומר, אתה שהיית רואה בצאן, תראה את עמי. You are like a shepherd who looks after the flock. He takes them to the correct grazing grounds. He looks after them. He makes sure they have plenty of water. ולא כתרועת מלך שמכביד עול על העם. And you won't be a king who's going to be oppressive to his people. It's not David HaMelech, they are 100% sure that what? That he's going to be like a shepherd. כי אם שתהיה לנגיד, כי תכיר כי השם יתברך הוא המלך, והנך נגיד ומנהיג מתחת ידו יתברך. וזה לשון נגיד שהוא מנהיג וממשיך. That means two things. Number one is the physical shepherd. And the second one is you are standing opposite Hashem the whole time. The word Nagid is the same word as Neged. You are the whole time opposite HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You are the one who physically is going to rule over us. And the second one is the what? You are Neged. You are opposite HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And here, in this statement, is in the essence what goes on here, and we're going to read the Rambam, which is quite fascinating. The Rambam says the following in number 96. Ein ma'amidim melech b'tchila ela al pi bezdin shel shivim skeinim v'al pi navi. 70 elders. Ki Yoshua sheminau Moshe Rabbeinu bet dino. Ukeshaul v'David sheminam Shmuel aramati ubet dino. So therefore, what happens? In order to have a king, you need a bet din of shivim skeinim. You need to have the 70 elders, and you didn't Navi. And that's what happens with David HaMelech. He has the acceptance of the people, he has the acceptance of the Sanhedrin, and he has the Navi. Now, let's go. Yes, 1 minute, Harold, and then we'll what's it called? Says the Rambam. Kederech shechilek lo hakatuv hakavod hagadol. The same way as the Torah gave him this tremendous honor. Kach tzivahu liot libo bekirbo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded him to have his heart inside him. Shafel, v'chalal, low down, anava, v'libi chalal bekirbi. My heart is like in a vacuum inside me because my heart belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'lo yinak gasut lev, and he shouldn't show off to the people. Yeter midai, shenemar levirti rum levavo. V'yeh chonen u'merachem liktanim u'gdolim. He's got to be kind and merciful to young people and old people. He's got to look after them. Please listen to me. Yitnaheg ba'anava yitera in this week's parsha. Ein lanu gadol mi Moshe Rabbeinu v'hu amar v'nachnu ma lo aleinu k'tilatchem v'yizbol tircham. You should bear their trouble of masa'am v'kivtzfam kasher yisa ha'omen et yonek, like a mother carries around the baby. Ro'eh kra'o ha'katuv. He's a shepherd. Lir'ot b'Yakov amo. It's written in Sefer Yishayahu, that, Rabotai, is the essence of the first statement of the people of Am Yisrael. Let's go over it again. Vayavo, they all say, line number 6. Kol shiftei Yisrael al David Chebrona. Vayomru leimor. Hinanu, we are. Atzmacha ubesarcha anachnu. We are part of you. You are our pump. You are the one who contains all the souls of us. Atzmacha ubesarcha anachnu. We are part of your souls. Not you are part of us, but we are part of you. Gam etmol, gam shilshom, even in the time of the Shaul. Yoshua melech aleinu, ata ita motzei mevi. Vayomer Hashem lecha, ata tirei et ami Yisrael. You're going to behave like a shepherd. You're going to care about every single one of us. Vata, and you are also going to be lenagid, the one who stands in front of Hashem, facing for the Jewish people. That is the introduction which the people want. The next stage is the Sanhedrin come, and they make a covenant with the Brit, etc., etc. Yes, Harold, that is the first stage.
All right. So the concept was that the Kohanim, Kohen Gadol, but the Kohanim in general, were the ones who provided the spiritual energy to Klal Yisrael, the ones who were the teachers, who were the and that it was their function to ignite the people in the service the service of God, and that the king was more of a protector of the people, governance, safety, economic well-being, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So are you saying that this is a transition point where now these spiritual functions are now invested in the Melech Yisrael? Or how does one reconcile the role of the Kohen, the role of the Kohanim, with what you just described?
Right. Very good question. Okay. There will always be tension between the king and the Kohen Gadol. Okay. Or lahavdil elef havdolos, between the Pope and the king. Always be. Okay. How do you actually ensure that the balance is correct? Okay. In inverted commas, the king has the power, the physical power. The objective is that David HaMelech has the ability to create this proper balance between everybody. Okay, the minute he's the one who's the heart, who pumps the whole concept of physical care and kedusha care, he's the one who imparts in the Kohanim that job, and that's what he does. For instance, the Gemara comes and tells us at the beginning of Masechet Brachot that the people needed to, they didn't have enough supplies and they needed to go and attack somebody else. David HaMelech doesn't decide by himself. He goes to the Sanhedrin, he goes to the Kohen Gadol. Why? Because since he has this perspective of the correct balance, he knows how to use everybody in the correct way. So correct, David HaMelech is the pyramid, he's the top of the pyramid. Okay? He then has the power to impart the avodah of the Mishkan in his period, the avodah of the Mizbeach of the Kohanim. He has the power to impart to the Sanhedrin because he knows how to balance the powers. Often that didn't work. Often there were always crises. The whole of Sefer Melachim, in actual fact, speaks about these problems of the balance. Okay? But the king, who is the proper pump, and that's what happens now. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given David HaMelech. Okay? For instance, let's give ourselves, we don't know the tefillot of the Kohanim, but we do know the tefillot of David HaMelech. Okay? That means if we think to ourselves, who was the one who taught Am Yisrael to daven? That is David HaMelech, not the Kohanim. They used to work in the Beis HaMikdash, but the one who had the power, who empowered the Jewish people far more than anybody throughout history, was the book of Psalms. He taught us how to daven.
So isn't this a difficult construct, because there's only one Moshe Rabbeinu, there's only one David HaMelech, and they don't live forever. So when you invest so much, not power, but so much expectation into a leader, you're going to get disappointed, and we see that historically that in fact was the case.
Okay, let's go one stage further.
So why did God create that system? I mean, so why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in essence, it's a system that's doomed to fail.
Listen, it all depends on the yitzarim, the inclinations of a person. Okay? The greater the person, the more he has ability to impart into other people and empower. Okay? Because what is the job of a leader? The job of a great leader is to empower others. Okay? Jonathan Sachs speaks about it the whole time. The empowering to other people. That is the greatness of leadership. Okay? Shlomo HaMelech, okay, and his name is Shlomo, and Rav Hutner says about Shlomo that he's got the same letters as Le Moshe, Shin Lamed Mem Hey Le Moshe. Shlomo HaMelech dreams that he will be able to carry on the dream of Moshe Rabbeinu and the dream of his father. Okay, but what happens? Yetzer Hara. But the Torah speaks, but the whole concept of the Torah is, in actual fact, the empowering of the king. And if you learn the Rambam, what we just said before, what is Tchunot have to be, okay, then correct. Because we're all humans. We're all humans. And the whole objective of a great person is always the ability to empower others. That is leadership. Okay, if you read Jonathan Sacks's books, the whole thing he speaks about that.
So that's the point. The only once in many generations will you have a Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Only once you have a Moshe Rabbeinu. Once you have a David HaMelech. But 90% of history, you have a bunch of Shlemiels and Shlemazels.
The Shlemiel and Shlemazels are us. Correct. I agree. Okay. Take the Chofetz Chaim. Okay. How he empowered great people. You see, there's a very famous hesped, eulogy of Rav Kook on the Chofetz Chaim, what they thought of the Chofetz Chaim in his period. Okay, the power of empowerment, how he gave it over, etc., etc. Great Rabbonim. Okay, take the Lubavitcher Rebbe. What did the Lubavitcher Rebbe do? The whole of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's idea was empowering others. That was his greatness. Okay, you only have one Lubavitcher Rebbe in a generation, but you hold every time you one of the things which you hear him is whoever he speaks to, the Yechidus, you've got more to give. You've got more to give. Empowering others. That's what David HaMelech does. That's what he's supposed to do. And a great leader has to do that. The power of empowerment. Okay? I'll tell you something else. Okay? One more thing. Okay? A rabbi who's scared to bring in other people to his shul to speak is exactly that. No, I'm serious. Okay? If a person is confident in himself, all what he wants to do is empower others. Empower other people. Give it over. Okay? And that is what David HaMelech is. That's what that is the pump. That is the true pump of life. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe was the pump of all the shlichim, etc., etc., and he carries on doing that. And the Chofetz Chaim was the pump, and Jonathan Sacks is a pump. And I really think he's a pump for so many different things. That's what there is. And we fail. It's the Shlemazels who fail, not the great people. Right. Let's carry on. Yes, Phil.
I would think that Ezra did a public relations job because those are his failings. And they were covered up. And when you say he's part of us or we're part of him, this is excellent PR. Because the fact of the matter is, course of Jewish religious history is one machlokes after another. And even starting back to the Shivim, the Zekanim, who were supposed to help Moshe, I didn't see in Chumash anywhere where they helped him.
I agree. Listen, atzmacha uv'sarcha, for a people to come and say that, okay, which is written in both books. Okay, let's just go back to that statement. It's written in both books, both in Divrei Hayomim and in Shmuel. This statement is not only written in Sefer Shmuel, it's also written in Ezra. There was no argument. How long does that last for?
15 minutes.
Exactly. Half an hour, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. That concept of that you are our pump very rarely lasts. Okay, you have to have such a tremendous amount of respect, and the king has to have so much amount of respect for his people. And I'm saying, when you look at it, okay, and I'm just giving an example, and I'm not a Lubavitcher Chosid, okay, but when the Rebbe became the Rebbe, okay, in the 50s, his whole life was empowering others. There was nothing else, just empowering other people. He believed, okay, I'm your pump, and we'll do it. And to have people to follow in that way, You have to create an environment that way. Okay, that the people feel so close to the David HaMelech, and in every single way, you just behave in such an unbelievable way. That is something exceptional. Right. But correct, it lasts for 15 minutes. Okay, I'll give an example. You appoint a guy, a rabbi, after 2 years, gamarnu. No more atzbecha b'sorcha anachnu. Okay, that's the way it is. That's the way life is.
What do you do? What do you do with the Shevim Zakena?
With the what?
The 70 advisors that the king is supposed to, the Jewish people is supposed to have. That today is the Knesset, right?
Don't bring in politics to today, okay? I'm not. Don't pull me in those directions, okay?
Well, I just
don't bring me to politics, Phil. I don't speak politics. Never do I speak politics. We're learning Tanakh, and I'm just trying to impart ideas which we see is the essence of Yiddishkeit. And as you said, and as Harold said before, there are plenty of shlemiels and shlemazels going around. That this system fails. The leaders are shlemiels and shlemazels, and the people are shlemiels and shlemazels. And that's it. We are our own enemy. We are our worst enemy. Sometimes the leader's the worst enemy, and also the people are the worst enemy. And that's the way it is.
So what does the Rabbi Shalom do with this?
What?
I said,
he has plenty of patience with us.
But we don't live long enough.
Okay, we don't. We don't. Okay, let's go one stage further.
But would you agree that Ezra did a public relations job?
Ezra got the prophecy of Hashem to do that. He was a Novi.
He's the one who found the Chumash, right?
He was the one who created the Tanakh. Yeah, 100%. And he was a Novi. Right. Okay, now we're going to go, but we won't finish it. Okay. I just want to introduce a new idea, which is quite amazing. Okay, let's go back to the Psukim. Hashem, the next share, because I think in 2 weeks' time I'm giving a share, so we won't forget about it. Okay, line number 12, and in line number 22. The story is Vayavo kol ziknei Yisrael el hamelech Hevrona, vayichrot lahem hamelech David brit bechevron lifnei Hashem, vayimshechu et David lemelech al Yisrael. Now, same thing is in line number 23. Vayavo kol ziknei Yisrael hamelech Hevrona, vayichrot lahem David brit. David creates a covenant between them. Lifnei Hashem. What's this Lifnei Hashem? What does it mean in front of God? Now, the concept of Lifnei Hashem here, there's a Rashi, the Sefer Divrei Hayomim again. Rashi is not Rashi, but he asked the question. He says, what does it mean Lifnei Hashem? V'halo lo haya hamishkan b'Chevron. The Mishkan wasn't in Hebron. The Aron Kodesh was in one place. The Mishkan was another place, etc., etc. And therefore, Rashi, the Mefaresh in line 112 says the following: Elomau lifnei Hashem. What does it mean? Lifnei Hashem. Kol makom shosim tnai. Wherever you make a condition, or kortim brit, or you make a covenant, hamakom sham. Kodesh Baruch Hu is there. דוגמה ביפתח, לפני השם במצפה, ודוגמה ומעלה מעל בשם, וכיחש בעמיתו. A person makes an agreement between one another. Okay? Remember who you're doing it in front of. You're doing it in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, David HaMelech, this is the chidush of David HaMelech, of the story. And that's what Rashi comes along and says. Ruvain makes an agreement with Shimon, who is the main witness there. The main witness is in front of HaKadosh Baruch. That means your word and my word, which creates a bond. The witness is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's a fascinating insight, which we're going to learn next week or next year, written by somebody who wrote a book called Mishneh Sachir. Mishneh Sachir was written by Rabbi Socho Shlomo Teichtal. Anybody heard of him? Yeah. Harold, what do you know about him?
Well, he was a Hungarian rabbi. He was under the tutelage of the Munkacher and very anti-Zionist, but he changed his opinion during the war when he saw what was happening, and he wrote the book Eim Habanim Smecha, which is an incredible book where he extols the visionaries, the secularists, saying that they're doing God's work, and that the Eretz Yisrael is a Yerusha, just like the Torah, and all kinds of became a Zionist of Zionists.
Right. Anyway, so he's got a fascinating insight in one of his writings on this subject, Lifnei Hashem, which in actual fact is a Musar Haskel. It teaches us how to relate to our words, how to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does it mean? Baruch HaMakom, Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere. And this Lifnei Hashem, in actual fact, the essence of this idea that we're going to start in Nechemya Hashem next week, and we're going to discuss it in great detail. Okay, I'll see you in Nechemya Hashem the next year. We're going to start from there. Okay. Have a good week, guys.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. Whatever.